Hey, this is Stuchiu. Wanted to do a quick video about takeaways from Blast Miami. There are a few things I wanted to go over, the bigger ones in general. Not going to go over every team or every match or whatever. First one is obviously the format. I think it's basically come under heavy hot fire in the last two tournaments. Like the last Blast, basically, Enk and Liquid had the same record, but because Liquid had the round differential, they got to go to the finals. And not only that, but that was the best match of the group stage, Liquid versus Ents, and it ended on an anticlimactic draw, which was trash. Basically, I don't think anybody wants that, because basically you're just ending a great story without its conclusive finale, and there is no sequel where you got to see how it plays out, because there's no overtime and they don't get to play each other in a playoffs match or whatever. So in general, that's obviously terrible. The other part that was terrible was shown in this Blast, where basically after Liquid beat Astralis, they were incentivized to lose to MIBR. And obviously, I don't think Liquid as players or Liquid as a team or even Liquid as an org would tell their players oh, it's you should throw away this match, obviously, because they're professionals and whatnot. But if the game theory incentivizes that a team should throw a match, it's inherently a bad format. And this is something everybody should know by this point. We've seen this multiple times throughout esports history, and I know some of the Blast guys have seen this play out before. They all saw, I know some of them have worked in esports before, so they should know this. The one I always go to is actually the OSL in 2013, and this was in StarCraft 2, not the Brood War one. In StarCraft 2, basically there was a group stage where Rain and Fantasy were both in the same group of round 16, and it was a round robin format. And in the final draw, basically, in order for Rain to get into a tiebreaker, he had to beat Fantasy, and then for Fantasy, he no longer had anything to play for. And at the same time, Fantasy and Rain were both teammates on SKT. So what did you think would happen? Basically, Fantasy just lost. He didn't even have to throw. He just had to play worse than normal. Even if he was playing his best, he probably would have lost to Rain anyway, but that's beyond the point. So basically, Rain forces the tiebreaker. Rain wins out in the tiebreaker, and then Rain moves on in the tournament. But that's always left a sour taste in my mouth, because I think that kind of format is complete trash. And here we are. Basically, this format has a lot more flaws compared to every other format we have in CSGO or just esports in general. I think double elimination is better, Swiss is better, the new ESL format they're using for their bigger tournaments is much better. GSL groups are better. I can't think of one that is worse than this. And then the other thing you have to think about with this format is basically you play 6 to 7 games, and that's basically that's assuming you make it to the finals, right? And that's only basically 5 best of 1s and then 1 best of 3. And so the one calls this an exhibition tournament, and I think that's an accurate assessment of Blast's place in the tournament organizer circuit. Is that in terms of importance, it's actually not. It's not anywhere close to what I consider a premier tournament organizers, just because of how the format works. So Star Ladder, E-League, ESL, DreamHack Masters, those types of tournaments, right? And if you want, you can just count the amount of games you can play one tournament to the next. If you want, let's compare it to Star Ladder. So in Blast, you can play at max 8 games. In Star Ladder, you can play max up to 15 games in the group stages alone, and then you add on top of that potentially 9 more games in the playoffs. So in one tournament, you're actually tested in an extreme amount of best of 3s in the Star Ladder format we had, whereas in this one, you're barely tested at all. So in terms of overall legacy and importance to your achievements, Star Ladder is actually far more important than Blast. And that's getting to the next bit, which is about Astralis and Blast. And if you want, you can go to Thorn's Twitter. I think he had a Twitter argument or discussion, whatever you want to call it, with Zonic about their decision to not play at any of the tournaments outside of Blast for like the next 3 months or for like 3 months or something. And the problem with that argument is obviously like everybody should know, all the TOs should know each other's dates. So obviously like Blast could, you know, schedule the dates in such a way that Astralis had to pick between one or the other. And obviously since Refresh owned Astralis, they are incentivized to pick Blast over like Star Ladder or DreamHack Masters or whatever, right? But ignoring all that, the basic problem for Astralis and Refresh, right? I guess for Astralis just as a team, like outside of the Refresh crap and the conflict of interest crap, is that basically they're only hurting themselves by going to these Blast tournaments instead of the bigger premier tournaments, Star Ladder, DreamHack, ESL. Because let's be real for a second, I think Astralis are already the greatest of all time. But when we look at this part of their period, it could have been so much greater if they had won something like a Star Ladder, if they had won something like a DreamHack Masters instead of the Blast. Like, there's a reason none of us even like blink or even remember the time when Astralis didn't make it out of group stages in one of the last tournaments where they got like third or something. It's because of the way the tournament is structured. Like, nobody can take it as seriously. Like, I think Max Millet on Twitter basically said, yeah, so these are the two big things about Blast. Was like, he was like, yeah, Nico's fucking god, and then Stuchiu had a terrible tournament for his standards. And then the third thing he said was, but we'll all forget this next tournament comes around because Blast is pretty forgettable. And that's kind of the problem for Astralis, because I want to see them push their edge of greatness to its maximum potential. And because of the way the conflict of interest works out, because of their choices of going to Blast instead of these more prestigious tournaments, they're just hurting themselves more than they're hurting anybody else, is the way I see it. So I just think it's a really sad state of affairs for Astralis. All right, moving on to the actual games. I think there's only really two teams of note to talk about. Obviously, the two teams in the finals. Like, sure, MIBR beat Astralis on Overpass, but actually, I will add that in, not because that particular map is interesting, but because the trend between MIBR, Overpass, and Astralis is interesting, because it basically confirms a theory I've had since 2017. So back in 2017, the PGL Krakow Major, Astralis were able to beat SK at the time on Overpass, and at the time I attributed that victory to Device, largely because what happened on the T side of Astralis was that Device was able to consistently find the pick on Fallen, and basically he heavily anti-sharded Fallen in that match and like just killed him everywhere, right? And then the reason I said this was the reason SK lost that match, beyond the fact that obviously you're putting them in like a 5v4 situation, was because the easiest way, their biggest weapon at the time, SK's, was actually Fur, not Fallen, in terms of opening entries and opening picks. So by killing Fallen first, you're basically forcing Fur to like take an even bigger gamble as the CT side entry, and he can't do that because of the way the SK system is set up, where like they're fine losing the first guy, but they won't lose the second guy on like a gamble like that. And so by killing Fallen, they diminished Fur's role on the CT side, and then by doing that, they took the map. And basically, if you look at the subsequent matches they've had on Overpass in this Phelps roster, obviously the Astralis roster is completely different now, even though only one guy changed. But even if you look at just purely the CT side, basically their inherent problems are exactly the same. Like when you look at the Overpass match at the Major from Katowice, Fur was getting way too much information, way too much impact on the CT side for MIBR. Basically, the way Astralis play that map, they've never found a perfect way to clear everything on the A side. They can't clear long, toilets, mid, and connector in time, and water and the B side, right? They can't do all of it, so they have to pick and choose. And so if you have a very strong, instinctive, aggressive player like Fur, who kind of takes over that space, who kind of figures out the gaps in the armor, the gaps in like the map control, he will get that information, and then all of a sudden like the team collapses in on Astralis, and then they get taken out on Overpass. Like this is also like this isn't just a problem for specifically this matchup. Like I think Rain has done this to them too, in like a FaZe versus Astralis match. So, and FaZe versus Astralis matches on that particular map. So just something interesting to note in terms of tactics for Astralis and their CT side their T side on Overpass is that's kind of their Achilles heel. But even then, it's like pretty relative. Basically, there's only like a few guys I can think of in the world who can do that, and it just happens for still one of them. Also, like fucking Coldzera went ham here. Right, moving on, the two big teams I wanted to talk about. First is FaZe, and this is basically, I don't think FaZe were very good on the first day. I thought they were very good on the second day, and then they kind of like smashed everybody. And basically, this is kind of the apex of FaZe so far in this new Nico Sports era, if you want to call it that. And what I wanted to point out here is that basically FaZe have had linear progression, and that's pretty rare to see in a team. Usually when teams talk about like getting better or whatnot, it's actually like more of like a wave than it is like a straight like inclining line. And in the case of FaZe, basically, I thought they were pretty bad at the major. I thought they had really good moments and then like a really bad moment at the end at Star Ladder. So like basically at Star Ladder, they almost took out Renegades in that best of 3, and if they did, they would have been in the playoffs, but they didn't. So, and then they went to Enk. I think Enk were just a better team. Lost that, like pretty competitive, but not nearly as close as the Renegades match. And then they got trashed by North. So that's kind of why I was like, that even though they lose out in the group stages and in the Star Ladder, it was technically a better event for them than the major. And then you come to this event, I'm like, what are they going to do here? First day didn't look very good, so I thought maybe they're going down. But second day looked fucking fantastic. They just smashed everybody. And so FaZe win the event. And I think this is basically like the 4th or 5th example I've seen of how important a coach can be for a new in-game leader at the top level. So obviously Yank joined this team before the year started. I even wrote like an entire article about how Yanko is probably like the guy who can potentially resurrect this squad, and it's up to him and working together with Nico, and that's kind of the answer. And it's interesting because this kind of parallels. I wrote an article about it. I don't know if it'll come out. Like at worst, I'll probably just like publish it for free or whatever. But basically, in this article, I went through Nico's entire career in Mouse Sports as like an in-game leader, and there are basically 3 periods of that point of him as an in-game leader during Mouse. The first point was when he was playing all around himself as the superstar player. The second point is when he worked with Kassad for that one tournament, and that was like the best calling, our best team play we'd ever seen on that Mouse. And then Kassad was removed from Mouse, and then it all kind of fell apart. And then the third part of Nico's like leadership was when he like completely reversed ship, decided that, you know what, maybe I'm not the star player, maybe I'll enable the other players on the team. But by doing that, like technically the stats of the other players went up, like particularly Dennis and Speedy at that point. But the problem with that particular maneuver was basically they were playing against their strengths, and so they became a worse team as a result. And so in this particular FaZe roster with Nico and Yanko, basically, I think Nico is still the polarizing player on this team. I still think he's the best player on this team. But what has been positive so far is that they're kind of bringing back the other aspects of this team. I think like Adren is fitting in more and more. I think obviously we saw fucking Rain go ham at the finals of this event. I think Overpass are still really bad. I don't really know what the fuck happened there. Guardian still has his moments. So overall, I just think the individual play is getting better for this team, and the team play is getting better for this team. And this trend of coach and in-game leader pairing up and making the team overall better, we've seen it multiple times now. At this point, I won't say it's 100% confirmed, but like the correlation is like ridiculous. It's like 95% or some shit. It's like we saw Azure and Kasa do it with Renegades, Twista and Alexa B do it with Ents, Nitro and Zeus do it with Liquid, Chris J and LMBT do it on Mouse. And I think if you want to go a bit lower, you can say like Legia, God B. Like I feel like that actually worked out pretty well for them. Another one, Jonta and Angel, or LMBT and Angel. Like I think both of those squads were actually better. And then when he didn't have those guys, they actually kind of when Angel didn't have those guys, it kind of like fell apart a bit. So I think it's pretty clear at this point that if you want to be one of the best teams, you do need a coach. Actually, let me rephrase that. If you want to be like one of the best teams in this era and you don't have one of the all-time great leaders already, then you need a coach. Like if you have Kerrigan, you have Glaive. I think Glaive could probably do it solo, even though obviously Zonix helps a lot. But I think basically if you don't have like one of those types of guys, then you have to have a coach if you want to be a competitive top-tier team at this point. Especially because in-game leaders are so fucking thin on the ground. Like, it's unbelievable. Last thing I want to say about this FaZe run is that basically because Nico was the superstar player and Nico was the in-game leader, and Nico won the MVP, you have to give his MVP more credit compared to like Device's MVPs or actually maybe not Simples, because Simples is like fucking ridiculous. But basically like a typical MVP would be like an individual thing. You're basically your individual play, right? Whereas like with Nico, because he was simultaneously like the best player and like the leader, like I won't say his MVP is worth more, but I will say that he deserves more plaudits in this sense because he's done more. Even if like I think the MVP or reward should only be about individual play, period. Right, so there's that. And then the last thing I want to go over is Liquid. And Liquid is, I should have seen this coming. I mean, when you think about it, like, has Liquid ever like not disappointed you after bringing your hopes up and your hype up? Like, even though Astralis played bad at this tournament, I thought their Overpass game was actually pretty good against Liquid overall, and I feel like they were actually pulling out some of that crazy like clutch factor that got them that win at IEM Chicago here against Liquid. But then Liquid were able to shut it down. A lot of it, I think, a lot of the credit, I won't say a lot, but a good amount of the credit should go to Elige for that particular upset, because he was super aggressive at the end of that map, trying to make a play happen for Liquid. And that's always been something I've been critical of Liquid, is in the clutch moments they are not decisive enough. They're not willing to like bet at all on like a fucking crazy play, a great crazy read or whatever. And I feel like Elige did that for them in that particular matchup. So I thought, wow, okay, this Liquid lineup's looking pretty good. I think like many people, they were the favorites, they should have been the favorites and should have won the finals. But I think basically there were two inherent mishaps for Liquid in this particular finals. The first, obviously, I think we've all seen it, is like Liquid just don't play that well under pressure. Like, I know they brought Stewie 2K in to add in that X factor, but he hasn't really. So far, he's 0 for 2. I'll put it that way. Like, he was supposed to bring it for Ents. Ents didn't happen. Supposed to bring it for this finals, didn't happen. So 0 for 2 so far in high pressure situations. And so that's one thing. Like, I just think individually they just weren't there. They just weren't clicking or whatever. And people talk about like Adren as superior to Zeus now that obviously like MIBR is really fucking struggling, and Liquid is still very good. So everybody's thinking, well, coach wise, I mean, Adren's probably great. And I just think it's a misnomer there. I just think that the two of them bring different things. And so we'll have to see how this continues to play out, so I can have a better feeling of what exactly was missing in this lineup relative to the Taco Zeus lineup before I make like a concrete judgment on Adren or Zeus as coaches. And then the second thing I wanted to talk about is I think Liquid had really awful self-evaluation here relative to FaZe. And what I mean by self-evaluation is basically, this is how I've always like structured head-to-head matchups. Even though like back in the day, I used to write a shit ton of StarCraft 2 previews. Obviously, I don't do that nearly as much, but if you do that enough times, basically, like you just start building in this mind like it's in a model of how things should go eventually. That's kind of how I learned how to analyze games. And in this particular case, basically, if you think about Liquid have almost everything in their playbook. And what I mean by that is, in terms of raw skill and firepower, I think they're the best in the world. Sure. But we're comparing them to FaZe here. And I think FaZe, on their day, FaZe, even not on their day, is probably competitive with Liquid in that sense. I think like they're very, very close. I think if FaZe have a good day, they're going to trounce Liquid in the firepower matchup. So I think that's like a pretty even matchup overall. Like if FaZe is on the point, and they were on that day, and Liquid's on point, then it's like a 50-50 coin flip as to who has more skill, right? But here's the thing. When I look at Liquid, I still think they have pretty good team play, and I still think they have pretty good tactics. I think they are they're still very structurally sound, even with the disappearance of Zeus and Taco, even if I think their consistency has gone down. So because of that, I actually think Liquid strategically should have been playing more towards those particular strengths. And this played out in two different ways in this particular finals. The first, obviously, is the map veto. Now, a map veto is kind of hard to analyze because Liquid hasn't really played that many maps. Think about it. Yeah, iBuyPower Masters, we can just ignore that bad tournament, right? And it was also their first tournament. We have the Major, got taken out in the round of 8. We didn't really get to see them play that many best of 3s in that tournament. Blast, and then the other Blast, like best of 1s, and then one best of 3 each. Like very, very small sample size to figure out where exactly Liquid ranked their own map pool. Even so, I think they made a few mistakes in the map veto, just on a strategic level, but I will explain what I think was their reasoning between each choice. So, FaZe removed Nuke. Obviously, FaZe don't play Nuke. FaZe, actually, they technically play Nuke, but they aren't very good on it. I think that was a completely valid choice from whoever was doing the map veto to take out Nuke for FaZe. Liquid removed Train, and I think this is their first mistake, because I don't think FaZe is that great on Train. And not only that, I think Liquid's actually surprisingly good on it, all things considered. Like, I think they can easily run the double off setup. I think they have a pretty good B anchor in Stewie 2K. I think they just have to change it up a bit. They have basically all the things they need on the CT side, and I think on the T side they have a pretty well-rounded set of tools, like executes, players, and all that to be able to be competitive on Train. So I think they should have floated that choice. But from Liquid's point of view, I think this is what they were thinking. They were thinking, we are the favorites here, so we should just play maps we like. Typical comfort stuff. So, you know what? I'll just take out Train because we don't like playing Train. And FaZe do have certain players that can go off on Train. Rain, Nico, Guardian, those guys can really fucking go off randomly on Train. So, fair enough. But I think also like the fact that Liquid removed Train here is like one of the indicators that shows me that they didn't really do the correct self-evaluation in terms of strategic planning against this FaZe roster. Like, Train is obviously a more tactical and team play oriented map than the subsequent maps that were chosen. So I just think that in that sense it was a mistake. FaZe picks Mirage. I think great choice for FaZe, actually, because I think if you look at FaZe's map pool and you look at their biggest strength is their skill, right? Their team play they're working on, but that's neither here nor there. Their weakness currently is probably Nico as a caller, Nico as an in-game leader. And among the different maps in the map pool, I think the two maps that Nico was pretty good at calling are Mirage and Dust 2. And so if you're not running into actually I don't think there's any team that actually has settled Mirage as their home map since like Mouse lost it back in 2018. So in that case, I think this is a good choice by FaZe. You get a high skill map, one that Nico is comfortable with as a caller, and then you run it. So basically, FaZe is correctly playing to their strengths here, and obviously Liquid is fine with this map because they have great players. They're used to it. It was actually one of their better maps in 2018. You go into Liquid's pick, and Liquid picked Dust 2, and this is where I have a problem with Liquid, because if you look at the way Dust 2 works out, like, it's a weird map, and what I mean by that is, like, it's actually more structured than people give it credit for, because I think everything is has a pretty set standard layout plan for everything. But like, that's kind of the problem for Liquid on Dust 2 versus FaZe, is like it's not like the most complicated tactical map where you have to like read the situations, read the angles, read the positions and whatnot. Like, this Dust 2, everybody knows how to play it. Everybody has like a basic idea of how to play it, and I think this has always been a map that Nico has always thrived on, even on mouse sports. Like, this was like the only map he was great on, I think, on that Nico Sports era as a leader, right? So I think basically Liquid picking Dust 2 is enabling Nico as a leader, and like I said, that's like the flaw of FaZe. It didn't really make sense. Now, I'll explain why I think Liquid did this. I think Liquid think they are the best Dust 2 team, and perhaps that might be correct. I actually don't know, and I think that's the problem. Is I don't think anybody can actually settle the debate of whether or not they're the best Dust 2 team, because Dust 2 is very variable. Like, yeah, Astralis was great on it, but they got trashed here, right? And I think I assume Liquid think they were fucking great on it, but they got trashed here by FaZe. Not trash, but like, they lost to FaZe. And even in this map, basically, if you look at the second half of this map, Nico and FaZe were taking long control, and what was interesting was basically Liquid is like letting them. It's like, okay, you take long, go ahead, and then they take long with their utility, then they execute on the A site, and then Liquid just use all of their nades and retake it. Right? It's actually basically Liquid in those particular rounds were exactly playing to what I think they strategically should have been doing this entire map, which was you play towards your tactics, you play towards your team play, you play towards that area of expertise rather than the raw 1v1 skill. Like, if you think about, I'll rephrase it this way. So when Liquid played against Astralis, Adren basically told them you have to show them less respect. And normally when somebody says that, like, most people take it as like a raw coach sort of thing. It's just like trying to hype them up. But Adren was strategically and tactically correct. If you look at the way Astralis is set up, and you look at the way Liquid is set up, their biggest differential between Liquid and Astralis is their firepower. So if you want Liquid to upset Astralis, they cannot play a respectful style, because they need to take those aggressive risks, force the game into a 1v1 battle across the board, and that's how you get Liquid to beat Astralis. Now, that's exactly how FaZe should also beat Liquid, because I think that's FaZe's best weapon. I think that's like the closest differential between the two teams. And so, arguably speaking, I think they probably should play a bit more respectful towards FaZe, both in terms of the map veto and in terms of how they were approaching it. And you see basically like Liquid were actually making the run back, because even though like Nico and FaZe were getting all that control, basically they were running out of utility when they got to the bomb site, and then Liquid could retake. And then Nico basically like broke it down, was like, okay, so I'll just like go by myself and kill you all at catwalk. And then that's kind of how he broke that hold that Liquid was using, right? So just in terms of strategy, tactics, and all that, basically that's kind of how FaZe beats Liquid here. And then I'll go over the final picks of map veto, because they also confirm this theory basically. Now, FaZe removing Cash. This is interesting choice, I think. But I think it makes a lot of sense. I just don't, even though Cash is like a high skill map, I just don't think FaZe have enough actualized skill and the positions necessary to play that map right now. Like, Nico was great, yeah, but like Rain has been iffy. Guardian's a pretty great opera, but he's not really, like, I don't think he's, actually, he's still on and off for me. But basically, like, the other three just don't really make sense. Olaf, Meister, Rain, Adren, like, they don't really make that much sense on Cash currently. Because, like, even though Adren had, like, that great game, like, was that PGL Krakow on Cash, basically solo carried Gambit in one of their matches there. That was as a star position. He'd be playing a completely different position. Like I said, there's a lot of small changes, and I think Liquid has actually shown they're very good on Cash, and so I think it makes a lot of sense for FaZe to remove it. But here's the problem, I guess, is with Liquid is basically they have two choices here. They can play Inferno or Overpass, and then they remove Inferno, and then they pick Overpass, right? And just in terms of, let's ignore the whole strategy thing for a second. I actually think if we just look at the base sample size, I think their two best maps, Liquid's two best maps are actually Inferno and Overpass. So if I was constructing this map veto, I'd actually have preferred they picked either Inferno or Overpass, and both of those maps play directly into what I was talking about strategically for Liquid. Basically, try to force the game into more of a team play aspect, try to force the game more into tactical, utility-based aspect. Inferno's highly tactical map. Yet how you control B, how you rotate around, yeah, it's actually played out a bit like Dust 2 or Mirage. Like, everybody kind of knows it, but because of the way the map is structured, individual raw skill is less likely to bite you in the ass on that map, especially because Inferno is not a great op map. So Guardian, you're at least like reducing Guardian's potential impact if you went with Inferno as your first pick. And then as for Overpass, I just think they're pretty fucking great on Overpass. Like, I think it's their best map so far. Right, those are my takeaways from Miami Blast. See you guys later.